Hi, Ricardo, and welcome back to the Peak Endurance Podcast.
No, thank you very much for having me, Isabel.
Yes, so you have been on before. It was quite a while ago, in the early days of the podcast. And I have to say, it was one of the ones that is the most listened to because it was about nutrition for ultra runners. And if there's one thing ultra runners are obsessed about, it's food. So, um, and you reached out to me talking about some new research that has been done on low carbohydrate, high fat diets, and you had some information that you wanted to share with us. But before we get to that, do you want to just remind the listeners what you actually do? Like, why are you the expert on this topic?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Associate Professor Ricardo Costa from Monash University at the base facility clinic, the Department Nutrition, Dietetics and Food. Basically, for the last almost, 15 to 20 years, we've been doing research and clinical practice in ultra endurance sports. I mean, that's where it all started, and it all started from gut symptoms. So we noticed that when ultra endurance runners were going out to races back 20 years ago, there was no guidelines or recommendations, so they were coming to us when I was based in the UK regarding what should I eat and drink for these ultra endurance events, which was starting off to be more popular. It was in the early days of ultra endurance running, whether it be 24-hour track, 40-hour track, mountain, multi-stage, desert, etc. So it was the early days. So we were the first group to actually test nutritional status, hydration status in the field, come up with guidelines and recommendations, and support a whole array of different ultra endurance. I mean, I'm the lead author of the World Athletics, originally known as the IAAF, guidelines and recommendations for ultra endurance nutrition and hydration. So that's based on, again, 15 to 20 years of research and observation.
Well, that's interesting. Like, even at the early days of ultra running, that people were concerned about nutrition, and I have to say, nothing's changed. There's just more choice, but I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. Um,
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
have you noticed that people still have a lot of difficulty in this area?
Yeah, because it all comes down to belief, I guess, and also habits, and also peer pressure. I guess there's certain trends and cultures within ultra endurance
Mm.
sports that developed in certain groups, and it's difficult to break from that trend, break from those beliefs. At the end of the day, these are all testimonial. What works for me? Try this, try that. A lot of ultra endurance athletes aren't really going into the science and actually looking at what's there and using that as the base, using it as the base. It doesn't mean you do it in black and
Yeah.
white. You follow those recommendations, but if you need to make tweaks based on your own individual tolerance, then you do so. And of course, what we've noticed over these, last, decade and a half is that a lot of the beliefs and cultures that people are following are actually leading to some serious high risk health problems. And at the end of the day, death.
Wow.
And to be fair and to be blunt, if you don't do things properly, you're putting yourself in a situation where it could be a fatality. And we've seen this, and we've reported this in the literature on multiple occasions. It seems like people are more following the online opinion-based text and not going to the scientific evidence-based text.
And it's amazing that, people, it's interesting because people focus a lot of time on training their physical body and doing, running, strength work, all these different things, but they never focus on nutrition. And yet can,
Mm.
like you said, can have profound effects if you stuff it up.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And it's an acute effect, so it could all be fine and acceptable in training, but when you go into competition, things are taken to the extreme. You push your body more than when you're doing training. You're in situations where you might not be thinking properly to do the correct
Okay.
actions. So it's these acute, rapid changes in human body physiology which would create those health issues that if a lot of people aren't aware of. I mean, I know there's, renobiolisis and hyponatremia and all
Yeah.
those things coming out, but I'm sure if I explain to people bacterial endotoxemia and bacteremia and systemic inflammatory response and sepsis, they'll think, oh, what's that? Yes, that happens every time you do an ultra. And that's
So
the
what
one
is
that
that?
if you, oh, what is that? Right. So what is that basically is that when you exercise, the gastrointestinal tract breaks apart because the blood flow goes to the muscles, goes to the periphery. So there's no blood flow to the gut meaning stomach, small intestine, large intestine, colon. It breaks apart. So basically your feces are leaking into the blood. And the bacteria that's there is leaking in. So the immune system goes into overdrive to try and clear it out. And it does. In a fit, healthy person, it's not a problem. It's actually good because it sort of trains the immune system that sort of bacteria and bacterial toxins going through. But in an ultra marathon situation where you could be at 24 hours, 40 hours into the race, where you've got substantial amount of bacteria going through, the immune system is now compromised because it's already done the initial attack. There's no more defenses. Then you will be septic. Similar to a patient that's in hospital will, post gastric surgery with sepsis that needs to be controlled with medication. That ultra endurance run is putting themselves in that situation in the field just because of the exercise stress and or not eating properly, because there are prevention management strategies that we've done before that we can help with. But that's the situation they're in.
Wow, yeah. I mean, I knew that there was damage done to the gut and the gut lining, but I didn't know it was quite that gross. And like, is that also another good reason for resting after your race, to allow that sort of thing to heal and repair?
Yeah, absolutely. So within 24 hours, we see all sort of the markers come back to normal. But in some situations, so some individuals that might have actual colitis, so clear rips and inflammation of the intestinal lining due to the exercise stress, they might need up 1 or 2 weeks of recovery. And yeah, every time you do exercise, you could have 1 or 2 days, your legs might be feeling fine. But as soon as you go back and exercise, again, you're going to get blood flow going into the muscles, not to the gut, and you're going to slow down that healing process of the gut. So it's not as if my muscles are fine and can go out. Yeah, what about the other body systems? You're not thinking about those.
Which is something that I constantly am trying to convince my clients about. Just because you feel fine, there's so many things you can't see going on in the body that you need to respect, that need to repair.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. All right. So what you actually reached out to talk to me about was the interest of endurance athletes in the low carbohydrate, high fat diet. And we hear a lot about that, certainly, in regards to, because endurance athletes go slower, you're burning fats, it's better off to eat fats, and all these sorts of things. And a lot of, well, it seems to me like a trend in a way. And there's been some research on that you wanted to share with us to let athletes know.
Yeah, it was something that again we found that we weren't expecting. That's actually quite concerning, and goes back to the previous discussion of the bacteremia and bacterial endotoxemia and all that systemic response. And this was a study that was in collaboration with the AIS. So they do a lot of the low carb, high fat dietary interventions on race walkers to try and enhance their fat oxidation. And of course, the summary of their research has found that the short or long-term adherence to this diet doesn't necessarily enhance performance. So they don't really advise these for those elite athletes. But I'm, as an ultra endurance sort of practitioner, consultant, and research, I'm more focused on it and more interested in it from the ultra endurance perspective, because I know that a lot of ultra endurance athletes do these diets in the belief that exactly what you've said. Don't need so much carbohydrates, I need more fats because of the duration and time I'm going to be exercising for. Therefore, it makes sense, like generally makes sense to consume fats so that there's more there to burn. But that's not always black and white, as we've seen. The human body is quite complex, and it doesn't just work. Given fats, there's more there, it's going to burn more. It doesn't work like that. Because there's a lot of cellular responses associated with that. So I don't know if you want me to just talk through the sort of the general gist of the research and what we found.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, basically, and we can sort of, as things come up, have a discussion on that. Firstly, we spoke about, we said, you know, ultra runners tend to be going more for that. And when we're talking about this, we're talking about low carbohydrate, high fat in daily eating and race as well, or are they separate? How would that be?
Athletes do different things. So I guess there's some group of athletes that generally consume your low carb, high fat diets on a daily basis as part of the training adaptation. And then during the competition, also try to avoid carbohydrates in the belief that it's going to reduce their gut symptoms. And then if you get gut symptoms, you have to reduce your workload, you might have to pull out the race, etc. So there's a group of athletes that use these diets to enhance fat oxidation and then try and avoid consuming foods during exercise because of the gut issues. Then there's another group of, again, of athletes that use these diets in training to create the adaptations, but then consume carbohydrates the day before and during. So to get the best of both worlds, you have your long reserve, slow burning fuel in the background, and then you've got your acute rapid fuel at the forefront, and also fuel to maintain blood sugar levels, to avoid blood glucose levels, to avoid that hypoglycemic and impairments in performance in that way. So yeah.
So with this study, which one did it look like, or was it both basically?
Well, this was more, it's actually an acute study. It was only 6 days of low carb, high fat, but that was enough to induce the ketogenesis. So ketogenesis in the blood was observed and evident. So it was more just an acute setting to compare these diets from the gastrointestinal perspective. So it wasn't necessarily fuel adaptation. It was more looking at the gut markers, the bacterial translocation, gut symptoms, etc. So it was only a 6-day protocol.
Yeah. So what did they find? Did you hear me there?
Hello?
Yep.
Yes.
Can you? Yep. Sorry. So what did they find? Did they obviously it was not so good for their gut as they were the athletes may have been hoping?
Yeah, so what we found was that so there was a 25-kilometer time trial, an exercise bout, when with fully carbo loaded, no dietary intervention or controls. So you get your baseline data. And then for 6 days, there was three groups. There was a high carb group, there was a low carb, high fat group, which was 80% of energy coming from fat, so less than 50% carbs for the day, whereas the carbohydrate group was 65% energy availability from carbohydrates. And then there was also low energy availability. So this is targeting more, again, sort of the AIS athletes where they're training a lot and not really eating enough for their needs, and sort of leading into the sort of the clinical issue of REDS, relative energy deficiency syndrome. So it's just a third arm of the study. But from multi-endurance perspective, I was sort of, my interest is the first two, the control and the low carb, high fat. So 6 days, in the 6 days, yes, there was ketogenesis observed. And then they redid that 25-kilometer time trial. And from the gut perspective, what we found was even at rest, so even before the exercise bout, intestinal injury, so the actual damage to the cells of the intestinal lining, the translocation, so a marker that determines the bacterial endotoxin going from the lumen into circulation, inflammatory responses, so systemic inflammatory responses, which is the sort of the clinical issue which leads to fatality, and then gut symptoms. They were all slightly elevated at rest compared to the control, the high carb. And then the exercise bout just made it worse. So basically, from the gut perspective, in terms of injury, endotoxemia, systemic responses, and also the symptomology, the low carb, high fat all raised those markers. So at the end of the day, it was worse. And from an interesting, it was a lot of the athletes avoid eating carbohydrates during and going on these diets to avoid the symptoms. Actually, the high low carb, high fat actually created more symptoms in that group. So
that's interesting. So why has that idea perpetuated that it helps to reduce symptoms?
It's more just general, I guess, normal, I guess, thinking processes that if you don't put anything into the gut, then theoretically there's nothing there not to tolerate. You're not going to get any symptoms. But as I said, the human body's like, isn't it complex? It doesn't all work in that black and white fashion. And I can explain the reasons why these things occurred.
Yeah, if you can, in layman's terms.
Yeah, okay. So first of all, general gastrointestinal physiology, so for absorption of nutrients. So when we consume proteins, carbohydrates, and fats, they all go into the intestine and they get absorbed into the bloodstream. Now, with fat is very unique that if you have dietary fat within the intestine, it actually increases the space between the cells. So it creates hyperpermeability. So all the cells of the intestine are all tightly packed. So it's not a big line of tissue. It's cells all sort of Lego blocks all together. And with dietary fat absorption, because it doesn't go in the bloodstream, it goes into the lymphatic system first, then goes to the liver, and then goes into the bloodstream. That creates a situation of hyperpermeability. So the cells actually open apart. So just the natural process of consuming fat and absorbing it already creates a hyperpermeability in the gut. I mean, I guess the pseudoscience term here is leaky gut or leaky gut syndrome. I don't like to use that. It's hyperpermeability in the clinical setting. But I'm sure this word's being flung around of leaky gut syndrome. Consuming fats does that automatically as part of fat absorption. So yes, of course, you're going to get more injury and you're going to get more translocation of pathogenic agents into circulation, even before the exercise starts. The diet itself will do that.
So is that going to make people want to do low-fat diets now?
Oh, well, to protect the guts and to avoid the clinical issues, yes, you have to. Otherwise, you're already setting yourself up for gut issues and potential clinical issues during an ultra-endurance event.
So maybe reducing fats before the race, is that a possible helper?
In those that are on low carb, high fat? Is that
no, just general.
Well, just general, it wouldn't be just consuming a low fat, high carb diet because we need essential fats as part of the diet. But again, I can't answer that question broadly because everyone's different. So my response to that is each individual athlete needs to go and see a sports dietitian to get individual advice. But just because you're on a high carbohydrate diet, it does not mean that you are not able to burn fat. Actually, another paper we have, Rausch et al., 2022 in Frontiers of Nutrition, we clearly show in 3 different studies, so it's a meta-analysis, a metadata paper, we clearly show that those on a high carbohydrate diet, ultra-endurance runners, actually have high fat oxidation rates because when they go training, if they go for a 4-hour run or a 6-hour run or do those long endurance sessions, your muscle glycogen, even if it's full on a high carbohydrate, only lasts you 2 hours. So you're automatically in a fat burning zone in the last 4 hours of training. You will inevitably need to be burning fat. But having the carbohydrates in your diet just provides that protection and that sort of top up of not letting the blood sugars drop so that you can actually train the full session without being too centrally fatigued.
Okay, so that all makes sense. So from this study, what are the recommendations now that they're saying for people who are thinking of low carbohydrate, high fat?
Right. So the general recommendations from this study, so there isn't any. The study was just a study findings.
Okay.
But going back to the World Athletics guidelines recommendations for ultra endurance running, it would be to provide sufficient carbohydrates to be able to cope with your high intensity training loads. Then if you're doing long steady work, I guess the word we use is nutrition periodization. So I guess a long story short is thinking about what your next training session is going to be and preparing your nutrition for that session. Example will be if you're going onto the track and doing, 1 kilometer reps in the afternoon. Of course, the night before and the day before, you're going to consume a high carbohydrate diet in order to fill the tank, in order to push that session hard.
Yeah.
Then after that session, have your appropriate recovery nutrition so that you get your adaptations to that session. Okay. But then the next day, if you're going to do a long 4-hour, very easy, steady run, there's no need to have carbohydrates in the muscle, because the purpose of that session is fat oxidation adaptation. So have your recovery nutrition, and then for the dinner, yes, have low carb, high protein, reasonable fat meal. So you don't fill up your muscle glycogen stores, so that you can start that session in a depleted state. But then you wake up in the morning and you make sure you do have carbohydrates for your breakfast before you go for your run. So you have some sugar, some glucose in your blood, so you don't go hypoglycemic.
Yeah.
That is it. The focus of that meal is simply just to maintain blood sugars. You don't go hypo. It's not going to be used in the muscle. It's more just going to be used to top up the blood. Go and do your session. Then after your session, think about, okay, what's the next session coming, and prepare for that one. So there's no dietary application these days. It's nutritional periodization, and it depends on what you're doing next. And I can't provide broad guidelines here. It depends on the athlete. I mean, I've worked with multiple ultra endurance runners at the elite level. They're all different.
Yeah.
Every person is completely different. There's not one standard particular diet.
So kind of what I'm getting is that it's being sensible about your food, and working
absolutely
out how your body performs best with how much food and what types of foods, and basically just experimenting. Would I be right there?
Yes, but make sure you experiment with a qualified profession. In this case, a sports dietitian. Yeah, that's gone through 5 years of training plus an additional 1 or 2 years of specialization in sport and exercise, that have all that background. So you're looking at the qualified sports dietitian has 7 years of exercise physiology, sports medicine, and nutrition and dietetics training under their belts, that understand what's going on. Because at the end of the day, it's all about physiology and metabolism. You need to grasp what's going on there, and then from there you can apply the nutrition and hydration to that individual.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess, like you say, because every human body is so different, that's why you need to not just go for what other people are doing.
Yeah, oh, completely, absolutely. That's a recipe for disaster. So yeah.
Because you see lots of on social media, this is what this person eats, and then people will copy that, but that's not necessarily going to work at all.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I can give you a classical example. Is we've had almost, over 200 ultra endurance athletes coming into our lab, and we actually measure carbon fat oxidation rates during prolonged exercise, all the way up to 3 or 4 hours. And every single individual has different oxidation rates and changes in oxidation rates. And that's the way we apply. So if we're working with an athlete, us at Monash, when people ask, what should I eat? What should I drink? I say, I have no idea. I don't know. I've got to get you into the lab. I've got to see what your losses are. And then I can tell you exactly what you need in terms of carb and water provisions. Yeah. And every result is being completely different. I mean, some people are at 36 grams per hour. Other people are at 120 grams per hour.
Yeah.
And then sweat losses, I won't even go into that. Electrolyte losses won't even go. Oh, geez, yeah. It's so individual.
But then, even if you're seeing a sports dietitian or, a dietitian, they don't necessarily have access to your sort of technology in that regard, but they can still work it out, can they? What you need?
Oh, they would. So they would have access to exercise physiology lab, either through the VIS or local exercise lab consultation, or us, or there'll be multiple ways. But if not, they will have the background knowledge and skills to provide some initial guidance. But of course, to go into it thoroughly, you will need to do all that physiology testing to get that information individually.
So if we're not going to go, the low carbohydrate, high fat, which, I mean, I've always sort of not been a keen fan of that one. What are your thoughts like on carbohydrate loading and that sort of stuff? Because that's constantly falling in and out of favour, and it's hard to keep up. What do you see from what your work
So with this for training or for competition?
for competition?
So it goes back to that periodization, so nutrition periodization. So you're going into a competition, yes, you're going to be out there for 4 hours up to 24 hours. You do want to start fresh, so you do want to start loaded up. So it would be important to actually load up. You don't have to do the super compensation protocols, which from 30, 40 years ago. But ensuring that you are topped up when you start the event, knowing that that's only going to last you 2 hours. And then that from there, you've got to ensure that you have some type of intake that you can tolerate. That's going to, the purpose of that isn't necessarily to provide the muscle with fuels, is actually more just to maintain blood sugar levels. And then ensuring that you've done all your training to have the fat oxidation in order to last you the whole race. So it is like a stepwise fashion. You want to start fully loaded and make sure the high carbohydrate diets are in there. Your fat adaptation is already there. It's not going to be blunted simply because you're consuming high carbohydrates. It doesn't work like that. The enzyme function and concentration is already in the muscle. It's not blunted by any form of carbohydrate intake. Then from there, come up with a nutritional race strategy that you can maintain and tolerate over the period of your race, and then ensure that you've got the training load in your muscles in terms of being able to oxidize to cope with that distance of that event. So they go together. Everything works together in a structured way.
Now, I remember last time you spoke about, if you were training your gut to take food during training to prepare you for your race, and it was quite a large amount. Can you remind the listeners what that was? Because I know a lot of people were quite surprised.
Yeah, so the gut training protocol, we use 90 grams an hour of 2-to-1 glucose fructose ratio, but that was simply to challenge the gut in order to help gastric emptying and or increase the transporters in the intestine to get more glucose into the blood.
Yeah.
So they're your two adaptations, gastric emptying and absorption. But that's just the training protocol. We now, when we run individual runners through our sort of testing in the lab, when we get their total whole body carb oxidation rates, for example, imagine they can only oxidize 40 grams an hour, then that's their training zone. So for example, we normally train at 120% of tolerance. So in this case, we'll 50 rounded off 50 grams an hour during training, but then race at 40 or even race at 30 in a hot temperature, just so we can reduce that gut burden.
That makes sense. But it also makes sense because even in training, you're never going to quite get the duress that your body's under in race conditions.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. But on another example, we have some elite ultra endurance runners which can oxidize 120 grams an hour.
Wow.
So their gut training, we push them 140 grams an hour.
Wow.
And then race at 120 or at 100.
Yeah. That's a lot. So in regards to if people had been thinking of high carbohydrate, low fat, or if they would be listening to this going, but I'm fine when I do that. Do you have anything you want to say to that?
Yeah, well, with the gut findings of the paper and sort of the main clinical outcomes, which are the bacterial endotoxemia or the systemic response, they are generally asymptomatic. So you don't feel those until the very end of sepsis. So it'll come on very quick and it's over. It's the classical response to heat stroke. So it's the same sort of pathophysiology of heat stroke. So it's asymptomatic. Normally, the symptoms we feel in the gut when we exercise, if we have a bit of problems, it's more functional. Gastric emptying, gastric emptying issues. So everything that sits in the stomach doesn't empty, and or stuff at the lower intestine in terms of malabsorption, fermentation, lower abdominal bloating, flatulence, urge to defecate, all that, or even injury to the intestinal wall and damage osmosis and diarrhea and all that. It sort of runs trots. So you feel those, but again, they're more functional. When it comes to, again, that bacteremia, endotoxemia, systemic response, asymptomatic until it's going to be a serious issue. So food for thought.
Yeah. I mean, I'm always a believer in not eliminating any particular food group, because I think we need all of them. So, basically you're saying that in the lead up to a race, just eat, a basic normal variety diet, a healthy, varied diet.
Well, if I could give you more general specific recommendations in terms of leading up to the race. So 24 hours beforehand, ensure you top up your muscle glycogen stores ready for the event, just for the first 2 hours, 2 to 3 hours. So you're going to have to consume a high carbohydrate diet, of which selecting foods which are low FODMAP. Low FODMAP is fermental, oligodimonosaccharides, and polyols. These are short-chain carbohydrates which bacteria like to eat up and ferment, and they cause a lot of GI issues. So selecting foods which are low FODMAP, example will be rice, or rice instead of some pasta. Breads, go for spelt flour bread instead of your normal one. Certain types of fruits to avoid, very strawberries, oranges, generally apples and pears, avoid. Onions and garlic are big issues, so avoiding those. But these are just examples. I mean, people have different tolerance. So low FODMAP diets. And then, of course, hydration within reason. So we normally drink to thirst. If you're thirsty, drink. If you're not thirsty, you're fine. That behavior tends to pre-event provide evidence of enough total body water ready to start the event. So there will be sort of the main features. Another one is fiber content. Try to keep that down, because that will have a tendency to give you some more GI issues. And in the lead up to the race, easy on the proteins and fats, which are more heavy on the gastrointestinal tract. So we do have evidence to show that with high fat or even high protein foods leading into the event, it does create more GI issues during the ultra event. So that would be the sort of general broad recommendations. Another thing I probably didn't mention is protecting the gut during exercise. So I did mention it all spreads apart, everything goes through. There is one strategy that consistently has been shown to stop that from happening. So again, stop the injuries, stop the permeability, reduce the inflammatory response. And that is simply carbohydrate feeding during exercise. So your race nutrition, make sure small and frequent of something during the whole race. Even towards the end of the race, you're not going to be burning carbohydrates, it's going to be more fat. You're consuming it anyway to protect the gut against these issues. And that's where gut training comes into effect. That after a certain period of time, we've seen ultras, they're okay for 1 or 2 or 3 hours, but when you start to go into the 6, 8, 9, 12 hours, it sort of seems inevitable they're going to have gut issues. So that's where gut training comes into play. Challenge yourself in training to then being able to tolerate it small and frequent during the race. And that is the most effective prevention and management strategy for any gut issues during exercise.
And when you say small and frequent, and you said that, when you've topped up with carbs, that's good for the first 2 hours. Would you recommend even within the first 2 hours having something?
Yeah, well, it should be right from the start all the way through to the end to protect the gut. And yes, you have to have in the first 2 hours, because it takes time. It takes 1.5 hours to 2 hours for that carbohydrate to actually reach the muscle, if the muscle is going to use it. So if you consume it in the first 20 minutes of your race, it'll only, if it does get to the muscle, it's only going to it's only going to get there an hour and a half, 2 hours into the race anyway.
Yeah.
So it doesn't make sense to me not consuming anything and then only when you're feeling hypoglycemic to, yeah, I need to eat something now. Well, it's too late. You've got to do it beforehand, give it time to actually get into the muscle. It's quite a long time.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, I do agree. And I always tell my clients to sip and nibble constantly.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess
yeah, sorry.
I was going to say the practical recommendations, like imagine the 90 grams an hour, small and frequent. Just break those over 20 minutes or 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So, give yourself, 20 grams or 20 grams every, 15 minutes or 30 grams every 20 minutes type of thing.
And I know you said sort of drink to thirst, but do you find that if you're sipping on water or a fluid, that helps with digestion as well?
Yes, absolutely. You have to. So if anytime you consume something into the stomach, if it's not diluted down to a 10% sort of concentration of nutrient, it's just going to sit in the stomach. So the ideal concentration is 6 to 10%. So even if you're consuming gels, people do gels and say, oh, it says on the packet, no need to drink.
Yeah.
No, you do. You do
Yeah.
have to drink. Otherwise, it's just going to sit in your stomach. So go with the scientific literature. Don't go with the marketing of the food packaging, please. I mean, I guess that's the best advice I can give.
Yeah.
Listen to the practitioners and scientists, not the marketing crew.
Yeah, yeah, no, that makes sense. What about, taking protein during a long ultra event?
Right, very nice question. Right, so from a gut perspective or fuel perspective, which one are you coming at?
Well,
From a
both, I
gut, I've
guess.
got answer to. From
I mean,
a
to be
fuel, no
honest, I
point.
find for
Yep.
myself, if it's sugary stuff, I struggle. I've
Mm.
discovered the bacon and egg McMuffin, and that works really well for me, and I don't get any gastric distress. And yet it's got protein in it and fat, and
Yep.
but that seems to work. I mean, as you say,
Yep.
you
Yep.
experiment, but
Yeah.
from a both perspective, from nutrition and fueling.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Well, from a fuel perspective, again, it goes back to individual tolerance and individual likes and dislikes. Again, taste fatigue, flavor fatigue, very big issues in ultra
Yeah.
endurance. So you've got to cater for those. So yeah, you can't eat just sweet stuff the whole race.
Yeah.
You have to put some savory stuff in there. So even if you're having small and sweet carbohydrates, you've got to put some type of savory, even if it's mashed potato with a bit of salt and a bit of soup flavor, whatever you'd like to do. There's heaps of recipes on that. No. Yes, if you can tolerate your bacon egg muffin, that's fine. That's you. That's your individual.
Yeah, that's it.
Of course, things that you need to be aware of is that it's going to take time to get through. So it's not.
Yeah.
It's more satisfying that flavor and taste fatigue. It's not necessarily satisfying the fuel availability for the body.
Yeah.
So, but both are important for overall performance and getting to the finish. Both are important. You can't just neglect the sensory in the expense of the fuel. You can't do that because they both go together. So that's from the fuel perspective. From the gut perspective, again, our research group have done 2 studies now looking at protein and amino acids during exercise and all the gut markers, and they seem to be as effective as the carbs. So remember, I said consume small and frequent carbs. It protects injury, permeability, systemic responses. So the protein does the same thing. The fat doesn't, makes things worse. But the protein intake, small and frequent during, does the same thing. We've even just finished a study looking at a mixture of amino acids. The amino acids did the same thing, but not as aggressive. So whole protein foods will actually reduce the injury, permeability, and systemic inflammation better than the amino acid sort of composition. So yes, from a gut perspective, yes, it does protect also. But what we found was, again, goes back to your individual response, is most of the participants couldn't tolerate it in terms of gut function. So bloating, urge to vomit, belching. So they had a lot of those symptoms with the protein versus the carbohydrate. But again, there was a lot of individual variation. Some people did well, some people didn't. So I guess it's testing it and see what works for you.
Yeah, yeah. Now, you were saying earlier that, when the athletes had already gone into ketogenesis, that there was some, markers that were problematic. What about, there's a lot of talk at the moment about exogenous ketones to take during racing. What's with that then?
Sorry, Isabel, I can't respond that because I haven't researched the area.
Okay.
I wouldn't be able to respond to any,
Yeah, yeah.
good, clear or precise outcome. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. It's just that's this latest thing, and yeah, who knows? I mean, there's so many latest things. I don't know. Or any final thoughts or anything that you'd like to share with the listeners?
No, I guess the final thought was just for the listeners that are ultra endurance runners, just be mindful of the risks from
Yeah,
from the gut perspective of doing a high carb, low carb, high fat diet.
yeah,
And that's, I guess, the best approach to going into ultra, as is in the World Athletics guidelines or recommendations, is that nutritional periodization. So think about what your next session is and plan your nutrition and hydration for that session, knowing that based on the training, the muscle will start to adapt itself to the training you give it. So although you might be on a high carbohydrate diet on certain situations, if you're training for long enough, fat oxidation adaptations will automatically start to occur. So just because you consume carbs doesn't mean you're blunting fat oxidation. It doesn't work like that. And then, yes, during exercise to protect the gut, the best approach will be small and frequent carbs during the whole event. But again, you need to train that because after a certain amount of hours, it's going to be difficult to tolerate that. And Isabel, as you pointed out, we've also got evidence that small amounts frequent of protein, if you can tolerate it, can also protect the gut as well.
yeah. All right. Well, that's fantastic to hear. And it's a good warning to people because we need to look after our gut because, like you said, it can have serious implications for our health and us for our running as well, basically.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast again.
No, thanks, Isabel, for having me. Thank you. Yeah, I'll catch you later.
No worries. Bye-bye.